guys in the dark.
This happens to be ongoing, maybe too late to even get noticed. I live in a modest house on a quiet street. 9 years ago, someone bought the house next to me to basically shelve their 18-year-old schizophrenic son. They pay the rent and utilities, occasionally drop off cash. He has done about as well as an unmanaged schizophrenic can do on his own. To paint an image, he is a muscular black guy with telltale crazy eyes. He stands on his balcony around 3 a.m. most nights, screaming and threatening somebody. Voices, me, I can't really tell. The first major incident was when he shot a deer from his second-story balcony. It was standing across the street about 4 feet from a neighbor's bedroom. The police had came, left when he didn't answer. I woke up to the SWAT in the bushes, and the next morning with some serious scoped weapons. He left with them, but returned a few weeks later. Astonishingly, I discovered that he incurred no charges for this. Aside from this, it had been general weirdness. Running down the street yelling, wearing winter clothing in the summer, sometimes boxers in the winter, collecting shopping carts, breaking down windows, stuff like that. Over the last 2 years, he had become more focused on me. I first noticed when he told me to stop contacting him, as in, I had become one of the voices. I had always been neighborly to him, and helped how I could, but it is becoming clear that he is directing his paranoia directly at me, a 40-something-year-old dude. He's becoming more aggressive, slashed tires, trampled plants, things went missing. I called the police. They take a record and say that there is nothing that they could do. I call his father, and he tells me that he is an adult and can't make him check into a facility. He won't sell the house or move him. For reference, they are from somewhere in the world that attempting an exorcism is a reasonable course of action. Last week, he began banging on my door at 3 a.m. nightly. He thinks that I'm stealing his rap lyrics, like I'm going to publish an album about killing and raping white people. My family is terrified, and he runs by the time I make it outside. I report it every single time, but he doesn't answer the door, and the cops or crisis team just leave. I really feel like the system is dropping the ball here, and it is going to take an incident for something to get done. Maybe not the scariest thing in the world to you, but it definitely is in mine. I had just moved into my first apartment, and was in the process of moving in. The door that led to my apartment locks itself automatically when it closes. So I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment, sat on the bed while opening the mail, while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor. It landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that had caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes had widened, and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me, and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts had rushed through my head, I picked up the phone, said sorry, I dropped my phone, I'm just going to take a shower and then call you back. The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walk in, quickly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out of my window. My apartment happens to be on the first floor, and I called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if someone comes out the door of the apartment complex. This was during the summertime, and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend, and he came to me just before the police had. I gave them my keys. They went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through the house. By the way, I was a mess, shivering and crying. Told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept into my entry door while I was getting my mail, hid underneath my bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day to make sure that I stayed safe. This isn't the scariest thing that I know about. but the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I worked at a pretty well-known record store in Los Angeles back in the 90s. A guy in his early 20s used to come in, ask me about records a lot. One day in conversation, he let a weird detail about my life slip that I hadn't told him. My dad is not American. I brushed it off, thinking that my coworkers had mentioned it to him since he was such a regular. About a week later, I was driving home, and my car happened to break down. It was incredibly hot outside, and I had to walk several miles to get to a payphone, which was outside an elementary school. I called a cab, hung up the phone, and after sitting for a moment, it started ringing, so I picked it up. The person on the other end said, "Bad luck about your car? Talk to me until your ride gets there." I hung up the phone, but it was definitely that guy. He had to have followed me from home, trailed me from the car, called the school to ask for that payphone number, and found a way to call me at that number. There weren't really any cell phones at that time, but there was a gas station and a grocery store right across the street, so who knows? I immediately quit my job, moved back in with my parents within 48 hours. I went to visit an old friend from work a few months later, and they told me that the guy was arrested for kidnapping somebody. My grandmother's entire life, she had a reoccurring nightmare. In this nightmare, she would walk down a long, dark hallway, turn to the left, open up a door, and see something terrible. She'd always wake up right before seeing what it was. In her 40s, she, her husband, my dad, and my aunt were on vacation. They booked the hotel at the very last minute, so they ended up having to get 2 rooms with 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the floor. My dad wakes up around 3 a.m., can automatically tell something's not right. He calls out in the darkness, "Dad!" There's no response. He turns to the bedside light. "Dad," he says, a little bit louder. Still no response. Getting pretty worried, he slides out of bed, shakes his father. He doesn't wake up. My dad ran down the hotel hallway to my grandmother's room and started banging on the door. My grandmother worriedly opens the door, and my dad shouts, "Something's wrong with Dad." He leads her down the hallway, a long hallway, to the last door to the left. My grandmother reaches the door, turns to the left, and sees her husband dead in bed. He happened to die from a heart attack. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling him from outside of the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that, but he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house. As soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him, turned around to see that chair that he had been sitting in moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. That would have crushed him if he hadn't moved. If he didn't come inside that house, he would have probably been seriously injured, or worse. Every time I think about it, it just sends chills down my spine. So I just found out about the Circleville letters. They're pretty nuts. Just the broad strokes, though, because it does get nuts really fast. In the late 70s, there was a bunch of people in a tiny Ohio suburb named Circleville and started receiving weird, creepy anonymous letters. The letters all had the same chunky, overly blocky handwriting, would often include threats and intimate details about the people that lived there. But they were just letters, so most of the town chalked it up to some crazy person, and then moved on. The person who seemed to get the most venom in the letters was a school bus driver named Mary. Whoever wrote these letters really hated Mary, alleged she was having an affair, and threatened to expose her affair to her husband. Mary had told her husband, Ron, about this letter straight away, and swore that she wasn't having an affair. He believed her. One night, Ron was home with the kids, just watching TV when he received a phone call. Nobody knows who was on the other end. This is just from the kids reporting it. But Ron gets furious, grabs a shotgun, and then tells the kids to stay put while he goes to take care of something. A few hours later, Ron's car is found smashed into a tree, seemingly having crashed, with Ron dead inside. His blood alcohol level is .16. He's covered in gunpowder residue, and his shotgun had recently been fired. No bullet was ever found, though. As time goes on, and one day, a year or so later, Mary was driving along and she spotted a site on the side of the road with the same chunky, blocky writing on the letters. It said Mary sucks. Exasperated, Mary stopped and tore the sign down, revealing this weird little cardboard box mounted on the pole behind the scene, with a handgun taped inside, and crudely ridged to go off if the sign was disturbed. It was straight up a string tied to the trigger. Really dumb. It was just dumb luck that the gun didn't go off. Mary had tugged the sign off the wrong way or something. So now everybody got freaked out. The local sheriff gets involved, manages to trace the gun to Mary's brother-in-law, Paul. Paul claims the gun was stolen, but it looks bad for him. Now, where the sheriff's department shits the bed, they claim Paul confessed to sending the letters, which they had no record of, and which he disputed for the rest of his life. Paul is imprisoned. Then the letters immediately start back up. Even Paul is getting them now, delivered to him directly into jail. Paul didn't get paroled until 1994, when an investigative reporter took the interest in the story, and then found the sheriff's department basically had zero evidence that Paul had actually done anything wrong. The only thing that tied Paul to the so-called Circleville writer was the gun, which Paul claimed had been stolen from his garage. To this day, nobody knows who was behind those letters.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.